The woman in the doorway was not what he expected. She was dressed for a board meeting at 7 in the morning. Cream blazer, hair pulled back, the kind of stillness that comes from years of deciding things. She looked at the man on her front step, then at the young woman slumped against his arm, and said nothing for a long moment. Gordon Marsh said nothing either. He had learned sometime around his 44th year that most situations resolved themselves better in silence. She couldn't tell the driver where she lived, he finally said. I found her outside the harborfront. She had your card in her coat pocket. The woman's eyes moved to the card in his other hand, the one he'd been holding since he fished it out of the girl's pocket at 2 in the morning, trying to figure out who to call. The name on it read Sylvia Hartwell, President and CEO, Hartwell Freight Solutions. He'd stared at that card for a while before he drove here. That's my daughter, Sylvia Hartwell said. I figured, Gordon said. He hadn't planned to be at the harborfront that night. He'd gone down after his shift to walk, the way he sometimes did when his mind wouldn't quiet, along the lake path past the grain terminals and the old silos, where the smell of water and cold iron had a way of resetting something in him. He'd worked at Hartwell for 11 years. He drove a yard tractor, moving shipping containers between the rail yard and the staging area. He was not management. He was not even close to management. He was the kind of worker who showed up before his shift started and left after it ended and knew every inch of the yard, but whose name appeared on no org chart that anyone in the offices would recognize. His daughter, Maya, was 12. She lived with him full-time. Her mother had moved to Calgary 4 years ago and called on birthdays and sometimes Christmas. Maya was at home with Mrs. Panagiatou from next door, asleep by now, which was the only reason Gordon had let himself take the walk at all. He'd almost missed the girl entirely. She was sitting on a concrete barrier near the ferry docks, shoes off, staring at the water. It was November. The temperature had dropped to 4 degrees. She had no coat. He stopped. He asked if she was all right the way you do when you already know the answer. She looked up at him and said, I think I need to go home. And then she tilted sideways and he caught her. Her name was Tess. She said it twice, like she was reminding herself. She smelled like white wine and cold air. She couldn't remember her address. She couldn't work the lock screen on her phone. She kept saying she was fine in the voice of someone who was absolutely not fine. And Gordon stood there in the dark with a stranger's daughter leaning on his arm and thought, well, he drove a 10-year-old Silverado. He put her in the passenger seat and turned the heat on and dug through her coat pockets looking for a wallet, a phone case, anything with an address. The card was in the inside pocket, cream cardstock, embossed lettering. He'd heard the name Hartwell his whole working life. It was on the side of every container in the yard. He sat with the card in his hand for a minute. Then he typed the address into his phone and drove. The house was in Rosedale. Of course it was in Rosedale. It was the kind of house that had a name, probably. The kind that sat back from the street behind old maples and said nothing out loud but meant a great deal. Gordon parked in the circular drive because there was nowhere else to park, and he helped Tess up the front steps, and he rang the bell at 2:45 in the morning, and the door opened in under a minute. He'd half expected a housekeeper. He got Sylvia Hartwell. She was in a robe, but she carried herself like she was in a suit. She looked at Tess first. A long, thorough look that cataloged everything and showed almost nothing. And then she looked at Gordon. She couldn't tell the driver where she lived, he said again, because it still seemed like the most important thing. Sylvia stepped aside. Gordon helped Tess through the door. A woman appeared from somewhere inside, younger, in scrubs, who turned out to be a private nurse who stayed with Tess when she was in the city and took over without being asked. Gordon handed over the card. He nodded once. He was halfway down the front steps when Sylvia spoke. Mr. Marsh, he said, you work at the yard. It wasn't a question. He turned. 11 years, he said. She looked at him for a moment. The maple above the drive moved in the wind. Thank you, she said. It came out like she meant it. Gordon got in his truck and drove home. He did not think much about it after that. He was not a man who dwelled. Maya made him scrambled eggs in the morning because it was a Saturday and that was her thing. Eggs on Saturday, very seriously, with cheese and too much pepper, and he sat at the kitchen table and watched her manage the pan with the focused attention she brought to everything. And he thought about the coming week's schedule, and whether the Northgate compressor needed service, and whether he should sign Maya up for the winter hockey clinic, She'd mentioned twice, and then stopped mentioning, which was her way of saying she wanted it but didn't want to ask. He signed her up that afternoon. The following Monday, he drove into the yard at 5:50 in the morning and did his pre-shift inspection and moved 47 containers before noon and ate his lunch in the cab of his tractor, reading a paperback he'd already read twice. Nothing about the weekend came up. Why would it? It came up on Thursday. The regional manager, a man named Patrick Doyle, called Gordon into the site office at the end of his shift. Patrick was a decent man, careful, fair, not given to speeches. He looked mildly uncomfortable, which was unusual for him. "You know, we've had some restructuring at the top," Patrick said. Gordon knew. Sylvia Hartwell had taken operational control from her brother 8 months ago after the board moved against him. There had been a period of quiet reshuffling. 2 directors had left. A new VP had come in from a logistics firm in Hamilton. "Sylvia Hartwell is coming to the yard on Friday," Patrick said. "Full tour. She's doing all the sites." "Okay," Gordon said. Patrick looked at him. "She specifically asked that you be her guide." Gordon held Patrick's gaze for a moment. "Okay," he said again. He didn't sleep well Thursday night. Not from nerves, exactly. He'd been in the yard long enough that he could walk it blindfolded, could answer any question about it, could explain every inefficiency and every workaround the crew used to compensate for equipment that should have been replaced 2 years ago. It wasn't about the yard. It was about the fact that he didn't know what the visit was actually about. He told Maya over dinner that he had a work thing Friday and she'd need to take the bus home. She looked up from her pasta and said okay in the tone that meant she'd already figured it out, which was her way. She was 12 going on 37. Sometimes he looked at her and felt something that had no clean name, pride, maybe, or gratitude, or just the plain astonishment of having made something so entirely her own person. "Is it important?" she asked. "Might be," he said. She nodded and went back to her pasta. That was enough for her. Sylvia Hartwell arrived at 7:15. She came in a black SUV with a driver and a woman Gordon took to be an assistant who held a tablet and said very little. Patrick Doyle met them at the site office. Gordon was waiting near the gate. He had not dressed up. He was in his work clothes, canvas Carhartts, a Hartwell issue jacket, steel-toed boots. He looked exactly like what he was. He had decided, driving in that morning, that there was no other way to do this. Sylvia came across the yard toward him. She was in low heels that had no business being on gravel, and somehow she managed the gravel anyway, and she held out her hand when she reached him, no preamble. "Gordon," she said. "Sylvia," he said, and felt Patrick's quiet alarm from 3 feet away. If Sylvia noticed the informality, she didn't show it. She turned toward the yard and said, "Show me." He showed her. For 2 hours he walked her through every section: the rail receipt area, the chassis pool, the container inspection bay, the refrigerated storage block, the customs hold lanes. He talked about throughput and dwell times and the pinch points that slowed the night shift. He showed her the compressor that needed replacing, the gate camera with the blind spot that had gone unaddressed for 8 months, the 3 stretches of pavement that were heaving from root damage and were going to be a liability by spring. She asked good questions, not executive questions, not the kind designed to demonstrate familiarity, but actual questions, specific, about things she didn't understand and wanted to. She took notes herself, not leaving it to the assistant. When he showed her the inventory tracking system they were still running on a legacy platform from 2014, she stopped walking entirely and stared at the terminal for a moment and said, "How has this not been replaced?" "It's been flagged," Gordon said. 3 years running. She wrote something down. At one point they passed the spot near the south gate where, 9 years ago, Gordon had pulled a coworker out from under a container that had shifted during transfer. The man's name was Reuben. He'd broken 2 ribs in his left wrist and gone back to work 6 weeks later. Gordon had never said much about it to anyone. He didn't mention it now. What he did mention, because it was relevant, was that the container transfer protocol in that section still had a sequencing problem that occasionally created the same conditions. He showed her where and explained how. She listened. She nodded. She wrote it down. Afterward, Patrick offered coffee in the site office. Sylvia's assistant took a call outside. For a few minutes, it was just the 3 of them, Gordon, Sylvia, and Patrick, at the scarred table with the coffee that had been sitting since 6 a.m. and tasted like it. "How long have you flagged the inventory system?" Sylvia asked. First time was the fall of 2021, Gordon said. I put it in writing. Patrick submitted it. Patrick nodded. It went up the chain. Came back as deferred due to capital constraints. Capital constraints, she repeated, in a tone that didn't comment further but didn't need to. She looked at Gordon. Is there anything else that's been deferred? He had a list. He had, in fact, been keeping a running document since 2019. Operational notes, flagged hazards, efficiency bottlenecks, equipment assessments. Not because anyone had asked him to, but because it was the kind of thing his mind did. He kept it on his personal laptop at home, updated it every few weeks. I have some notes, he said. Can you send them to my office? I can. Sylvia wrapped her hands around her coffee cup and looked at the table for a moment in a way that suggested she was organizing something in her head rather than resting. Then she looked up at him again. My daughter told me what you did, she said. She didn't remember much, but she remembered. Gordon didn't say anything. You didn't call the police. You didn't call a cab. You drove her yourself and you stayed until you knew she was inside. She was cold, Gordon said. It was November. Something shifted in Sylvia's face, not quite a smile, something quieter. Yes, she said. It was November. 2 weeks passed. Gordon sent the document, 12 pages, organized by priority and category with dates and supporting notes. He sent it, told himself it would probably go nowhere, and went back to work. On a Tuesday in December, he came home to find Maya at the kitchen table doing homework with a focused expression that meant she was stuck on something and was determined not to admit it. He made tea. He helped her work through a fractions problem without telling her what to do, asking questions until she got there herself. She got there. She sat back in her chair with the satisfaction of someone who had handled something. Later, after she'd gone to bed, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer. It was Sylvia. I've read your notes, she said, without introduction. All of them. Twice. He waited. We're going to address the inventory system. The compressor is being ordered. The pavement work is scheduled for April. Good, he said. I also had the transfer sequencing reviewed by our safety consultant. He agrees with your assessment. The protocol is being rewritten. Gordon looked out the kitchen window at the dark street. A car went by. That's good, he said. There's a supervisor position, Sylvia said. That's been vacant at the Brampton facility for 4 months. We haven't filled it because the candidates haven't been right. He said nothing. I think you're right for it, she said. I want you to consider it. He considered it. Not the way some people consider things, quickly, already composing the answer, but actually sitting with it. A supervisor role was more money, substantially more, and it was days, not evenings, and it was an office and a desk and people problems in addition to equipment problems. He thought about Maya and the hockey clinic. He thought about 11 years of flagging things in writing that went nowhere. Can I think about it? He said. Yes, Sylvia said. Take the week. He took 2 days. He talked to Maya about it, not asking permission, but telling her the way he tried to do with everything significant because she was old enough to be told. She listened with her chin in her hand and said, Is it farther away? 20 minutes more each way, he said. She thought about this. Would you still be home for dinner? More often than now, he said. Okay, she said. Then you should do it. He called Sylvia back on Wednesday morning. He started at Brampton in January. The facility was larger, more complex, with a crew of 31 and a history of turnover that had left the place in a state of accumulated small dysfunction. Not anything dramatic, just the quiet erosion that happens when no one in charge has been paying the right kind of attention. Gordon paid attention. He did it the same way he'd always done it, by being present, by knowing the names of the equipment and the people running it, by listening more than he spoke and fixing things in the order they needed fixing, rather than the order that looked the most impressive. He did not make speeches. He did not hold team-building sessions or post motivational quotes. He sorted the compressor and the gate camera and the pavement by March, and he rewrote the 3 most broken procedures with input from the people who actually ran them, and by April the overnight dwell numbers were down 11%, and the crew had stopped doing the sideways shuffle they'd been doing for years. The instinctive body language of people who expect no one to listen to them. Someone listened to them now. One of the senior drivers, a woman named Bev who had been there 12 years and had the institutional memory of the place embedded in her somewhere behind her eyes, stopped Gordon near the dispatch board one morning and looked at him directly. "You're not like the last one," she said. "I know," Gordon said. "That's not a compliment yet," she said. "That's just an observation." "Fair enough," he said. She watched him for a moment more and then went back to her route sheets, and Gordon thought, she'll get there. He was patient. He had always been patient. What he hadn't expected was Patrick Doyle. Patrick called him in late February. Personal, not through the company line. He was phoning to tell Gordon that there'd been some friction, that a few people at the Harborfront site had made noise about the promotion, that someone had passed a comment to a director at the regional level suggesting Gordon's position was the result of favoritism, that he'd cultivated a relationship with the Hartwell family for personal gain. Gordon listened without interrupting. "I wanted you to hear it from me first," Patrick said. "I don't think it'll go anywhere, but I thought you should know." "Who said it?" Gordon asked. Patrick told him. It was a man named Darren Childs. Someone Gordon had worked alongside for 6 years. Someone who'd also applied for supervisor roles twice and not gotten them. Gordon thought about this for a moment. He thought about Darren's frustration, which was real, about the promotions he'd been passed over for, which had also not come to Gordon, about the fact that Darren wasn't entirely wrong, that Gordon's path to this role had been unusual. "I understand why he said it," Gordon told Patrick. Silence on the line. "That doesn't mean he's right," Gordon continued. "But I understand it." He went back to work. The complaint went up to the regional HR office. A few weeks later, someone asked Gordon to submit a written account of his interaction with Sylvia Hartwell prior to his appointment. He wrote it out in a page and a half, plainly in order with dates. He wrote about finding Tess at the Harborfront, about the card in her coat pocket, about driving to the house in Rosedale. He wrote about the yard tour, about the document he'd sent, about the phone call in December. He did not editorialize. He did not explain himself. He let the timeline speak. The complaint was closed without action. He didn't hear from Darren directly. He hadn't expected to. In March, Tess Hartwell showed up at the Brampton facility. She came on a Tuesday afternoon, unannounced, in a wool coat and boots better suited to the cold than what she'd been wearing on the night he'd found her, which was not a high bar, and she asked the receptionist for Gordon and waited on the bench in the lobby like anyone else. He came out from the back and stopped when he saw her. She stood up. She was maybe 26, 27. Her color was better than it had been in November. She looked embarrassed. "I wanted to say thank you properly," she said. I wasn't in a good place that night. I don't remember everything clearly, but I remember you were calm." She paused. "That helped." Gordon nodded. "My mother talks about you," Tess added. "She doesn't talk about very many people." He didn't know what to do with that, so he did what he always did with things he didn't know what to do with. He said nothing for a moment. "I'm glad you're okay," he said. "I'm better," she said. It was a careful distinction. He respected it. She left. He stood in the lobby for a moment after she was gone, looking at the empty bench. By spring, he had settled into the rhythm of the new role the way he settled into most things, thoroughly, without ceremony. He got up at 5. He made Maya's lunch before she was awake. He drove the 401 with a coffee and the radio off, thinking about the day. He dealt with what the day brought. He came home, and he made dinner, and he helped with homework, and on Friday nights he drove Maya to the arena and sat in the cold with the other parents in the stands and watched her on the ice. She had found her stride at hockey this winter. She was not the fastest skater, but she read the ice well. She saw where the play was going before it got there. And she had a quality of focus that made the coach stop and watch sometimes. Gordon watched her from the stands and felt the same thing he always felt, that wordless thing, the astonishment. One Friday evening, Sylvia Hartwell sat down beside him. He hadn't heard her coming. She was in a civilian coat, no driver, no assistant, and she had a paper cup of arena coffee that she held with both against the cold, and she looked out at the ice, at the children weaving through drills. "My assistant told me you coach on Friday nights," she said. "I don't coach," he said. "I watch." She looked at him. "Which one is yours?" he pointed. Maya was at the far end receiving a pass. "She reads the play well," Sylvia said after a moment. He looked at her sideways. "You know hockey. My son played until he was 16, she said. Something crossed her face and settled. "He lives in Vancouver now. We talk on Sundays." They watched the practice in silence for a while. The Zamboni door was open at the far end and a cold draft moved through the arena. The overhead lights buzzed. "How is Brampton?" she asked. Better, he said. I saw the April numbers. April was a good month. She nodded. She drank her coffee. She didn't say anything else about work, and neither did he. Out on the ice, Maya received another pass, pivoted left, and threaded it through to a teammate who tipped it home. The small cluster of parents around Gordon made appreciative noises. He didn't clap or cheer. He just watched with the half-smile he reserved for moments nobody else would notice. Sylvia noticed. She gets that from you, she said quietly. The way she looks at things. He didn't answer. He wasn't sure it needed one. The practice went on. The ice filled with the sound of blades and the crack of sticks and the shouts of 12-year-olds who took their Friday evenings seriously. Above them, the old arena lights hummed steadily, and the cold came in from the open door, and Gordon Marsh sat in the stands with his coffee going cold in his hand and felt, without trying to name it, that some things were in the right place. He had not done anything remarkable. He had found a cold girl by the water and brought her home, and he had known the yard the way anyone knows a place they've given 11 years to, and he had sent a document to someone who asked for it. That was the whole of it. That was enough.